Right now, I'm in the middle of a negotiation where I'm representing a buyer, and we just received a call from the listing agent regarding a counteroffer that they sent back to us because we haven't responded immediately. It's been about 24 hours since we received it. And he just asked me, hey, what do your clients think? Are they willing to entertain it? Just trying to fill me out. And being a negotiator, because that's what we do in real estate, I said, I'm not real sure what my clients are going to do. They kind of had a line in the sand, and your offer price was higher, or your counteroffer was higher than where my clients wanted to go. And, just kind of playing the field, if you will, knowing that my clients are going to respond, but we just weren't going to do it immediately, kind of as a tactic, if you will. And the agent on the other side came back and said, hey, listen, if you're willing to come to this price, which was only like $2,000 higher than where we were, and lower than their actual counteroffer that they sent back to us, that the seller will be willing to accept that because that was their bottom line. And here's the thing, the listing agent just killed their negotiation because now we know where we need to be price-wise in order for the seller to accept it. Now here's the thing, I see this sort of thing happening all the time where the listing agent over-discloses information because they're trying to put a deal together. And in the example that we're discussing today, it's probably going to cost the seller about $10,000, maybe a little bit more, by having their listing agent say the wrong thing at the wrong time. So in today's video, I'm sharing with you the top things you should never say to your agent when selling your home. I've been in real estate for over 20 years and I've heard it all, from oversharing sellers to agents that just don't know when to keep their mouth shut. This video will help you avoid common communication mistakes that cost you time, money, and potential buyers. And the first one I want to talk about is never ever revealing your bottom line. And that's because telling your agent your rock bottom number can unintentionally anchor their negotiation. And it's not because they're dishonest or unethical. It can change how they approach offers and counteroffers, as I just mentioned in my conversation that I just had. One of the very first questions I ask when I'm sitting down talking to sellers is what's important to them. And most of the time it's price. Sometimes it has to deal with timing, but more often than not, it has to do with achieving the top price of their home. And what I can tell you is from being an agent over 20 years is that a lot of sellers out there want to tell me what their bottom line is, how much they'll take for the home. And I stop them and I say, hey, listen, I don't really want to know what your bottom line is. And the reason I don't want to know that is because I don't want it to impact my ability to negotiate on your behalf. My job as a real estate agent is to get you the most amount of money for that home. And we're going to do that through marketing. We're going to do that through exposure. We're going to do that through driving demand, all of those things. But we're also going to do it by pricing your home according to fair market value. So when we list your home, we're listing it at a price that we feel like is doable. We're listing it at a price that we feel like we can actually achieve. We're not pricing it low in most cases to drive up buyer demand and try to get some crazy price. And we're also not overpricing your home with this idea that buyers are going to come in, they're going to try to negotiate, and we're going to end up at a lower price. So let's just price it high so that we're building that in. No, that's not the right way. What we want to do is price it according to fair market value and try to get the most exposure on that property that drives demand that leads to a higher price. But here's the thing, if your agent knows that you're willing to accept an offer below that asking price, then there's a high likelihood that that agent's not going to be aggressive in negotiation, especially if that offer comes in above your bottom line. Maybe it's not your asking price, but it's above the bottom line that you've disclosed to them. In their head, they're thinking, well, the seller wanted X, they're getting X plus this, so this is a strong offer. Whereas an agent that doesn't know that, and they're looking at where they listed it at and the conversation they had about achieving top price, well, in my experience, that agent is willing to negotiate stronger on your behalf. They're trying to ultimately put the most amount of money back into your pocket. Now, while I believe that the majority of agents out there are ethical and are honest, if they know your bottom line, in some cases they could recommend pricing that home lower so that it sells quicker versus maybe a higher price that they had initially intended. So if you are considering selling, just be very, very careful not to disclose your bottom line to your listing agent when selling your home. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is not expressing urgency or any sort of pressure to sell when you're talking to the agent who's going to be selling your home. This kind of goes back to revealing your bottom line. If I know you as a seller have a certain timeline that you have to meet, or maybe you're in some sort of distress or you have an urgent situation, then that in theory could impact my ability to negotiate on your behalf. Now, I've personally been doing this a long time, and I like to think that I'm not one of those people, that I can separate myself from those situations and still negotiate strongly. But with that said, there's a lot of newer agents out there. There's a lot of agents that don't have the experience that I have. and unfortunately cannot separate themselves from those situations. So the last thing you as a seller want to do is kill any sort of leverage that you have in the negotiation. In my experience, this kind of urgency often ends up in the MLS as something along the lines of a motivated seller, which often screams discount opportunity to buyers out there. So the last thing you want to do as a seller is seem desperate in the negotiation process. If the buyer knows that you have to move, the buyer knows that you're in distress in any sort of situation, that gives them the ultimate leverage in that negotiation process. But at the same time, you also don't want to be the seller that says, hey, I don't need to sell my home. I can sit here forever. Because that in turn just tells your agent that you're probably not serious about selling your home. So there has to be some sort of balance. You don't want the process to seem like it has to go very, very fast. And you don't want to seem like, hey, I can sit here forever. So with that, you just want to make sure you're asking the right questions when you're sitting down with your agent to begin with. Ask them how long they think it's going to take to get your property sold. Now, oftentimes, I can't answer that question directly. I can just tell you what the market's doing and give you an idea of what similar homes in your neighborhood are selling at, which in turn gives us a really good idea of where you're likely to be. And from that, you can see if it fits in your timeline. And if you're someone that needs to sell quicker than the timelines that are being discussed, then maybe you go in with a pricing strategy where you're pricing it lower than fair market value, so you get a lot of buyer demand up front. And from there, you'll ultimately see what your home is worth. Now, if you've watched my channel for any period of time, that's not how I typically recommend pricing your home. But rather than revealing to your agent that you're in a hurry, you could try that strategy of pricing it so that you can create more buyer activity up front and hopefully sell that home quicker. Now, the next thing I want to talk about kind of goes hand in hand with the first two things that I discussed. But before I mention that, I'd like to take a minute and ask a favor. If you find any value in my videos at all, make sure you hit that thumbs up and consider subscribing to the channel. Now, this one is talking about personal life events, things that are happening in your life that could impact your ability to sell that home or your need to sell that home. I'm talking about things like divorce, or maybe you just lost your job, or anything that would lead your agent to believe that you have to sell that home and you have to do it quickly. Kind of goes back to the urgency thing that we mentioned earlier. It's not that your agent is going to go out there and just tell everyone, but oftentimes those conversations come up in open houses. Buyers ask, hey, why is the seller moving? And if the listing agent knows, they might just disclose it without even thinking about it. And trust me, buyers love hearing this stuff because it gives them leverage in the negotiation. I often tell buyers all the time, our goal is to call the listing agent and figure out what's important to the seller in that negotiation so that we can use that and cater in our offer to hopefully help our offer stand out. And if we know that that seller needs to sell because they're going through a divorce, or they need to sell because they're losing their job and they're in some sort of distress, then we know they probably want a quicker escrow, and they may even need some time to rent back in that property. Maybe we do a quicker escrow, and maybe we allow them to stay in that property for up to 20, 30, 40 days for free, because we know that's going to help them out on that side. Now, the next thing I want you to avoid is oversharing home flaws with your agent, as well as any potential buyers that you could come in contact with, right? Sometimes you're leaving the house because there's a showing coming and you end up passing the buyers of that property, you end up talking, and what I can tell you is oftentimes sellers end up disclosing things about their property that aren't material facts. Yes, as a seller, you need to disclose material facts about your home, things that matter legally, any sort of leaking, any sort of mold, anything you know is an issue in that property needs to be disclosed. But what doesn't need to be disclosed is the fact that your roof is older, that your water heater is older, that your electrical panel is older. If these things are functioning, but they're just old, who cares? And that's because you're not a home inspector. Allow the home inspector to do their job. If you start disclosing things or putting things in the buyer's mind, well, guess what? The buyer sees these as red flags. They see these as things they need to replace in that home, and it could impact the price that they offer on your home, or in some cases, they may not offer on your home at all because they see these things as issues. Now, with that, one of my pro tips here is not to be at your house during showings. If you have private showings on your home where buyers are coming in with their agent, by appointment only, I don't think you should be there as the seller. You also shouldn't be there during the open house as well. Any sort of showing on that property, you should be gone from that home. And that's because buyers will start asking you questions. And what I've seen many, many times is sellers killing their own negotiation by having that conversation with the buyer, by talking about things that are not material defects in the property, just things that are older or things that they would have liked to change in the property, that sort of thing. So rather than oversharing and providing this information, allow your agent to do their job and have those conversations with the buyer and the agent versus you having them. One of the other things I don't want you to do as a seller or say, to your agent or to buyers potentially is talk trash on the HOA, talk trash about the neighbors, talk trash about the parking in the community, any of that sort of thing. And that's because it could put something in the buyer's head, that makes them want to offer lower on your property because of something you said about the neighborhood or about the HOA, or maybe in some cases they don't even make an offer at all because that turned them away completely. Now you need to disclose nuisances and you need to disclose issues with neighbors, but you don't need to disclose what you heard about somebody down the street and start spreading gossip about the neighborhood. Remember, you're not hiding anything. You're just not planting seeds of doubt that could end up costing you the sale of your home. And the last thing I don't want you to say to your agent is yes before interviewing other agents, before talking to other agents. Don't commit to your friend or your family member just because they have their real estate license. You should do your due diligence. You should try to find a local pro in your market that knows your neighborhood, that knows your area, somebody that you feel comfortable with, somebody that can actually deliver on their promise. This is a major financial transaction. You need a professional, not a favor. So make sure you interview a couple agents, ask about pricing strategy, ask about marketing, ask about exposure, and also ask about their negotiation style. But on top of that, ask for proof of results, not just the promises they're going to make. Now here's where I want to ask you a question. Have you ever made any mistakes when selling your home? Let me know in the comments. Remember, selling a home is part business, part strategy. The fewer cards you show, the better your agent can negotiate on your behalf. Remember, even if your agent's your friend, they're still a messenger. And sometimes that message can spread further than you think. Now, even after you find your agent, before you run out and sign a contract with them, make sure you watch this video here.